Hello everyone, this is your friend Naruto Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was born without Kurama, Minato and Kushina alive? Part 4. 11 Anchor Point. Inoichi breathed a strained sigh as he watched the 8-year-old Uchiha boy take a seat on the couch directly opposite him. Orders had come down from on high directing the Leaf Analysis team to provide Sasuke with these sessions on a regular basis, but the Jonin was at a loss as to how to proceed. The two sat in silence while Inoichi gathered his thoughts. He'd participated in special arrangements like this before, but most often with the intent to tease intel out of people rather than deal with their trauma. He and his team opted for more aggressive methods when handling captured foreign ninja or other dangerous individuals. This boy, however, would require a gentler approach. Good morning, Sasuke, Inoichi said, easing back in his chair in an attempt to appear less stiff. Sasuke replied with a flat stare. As you know, we're here today because of recent events. You've been through something no one should have to experience, and Lord Hokage is worried about you. Are you feeling ready to talk about what happened yet? If not, we don't have to start there. Sasuke looked down, clenching his fists. He swallowed hard. A ticking clock on the wall punctuated the silence like a never-ending metronome. An eternity later, he relaxed his shoulders and returned the blonde man's gaze. I'm ready. Genma held up a hand. Don't mention it. I'm just happy I showed up when I did. He looked to Naruto first, then Sasuke. You boys gave it a solid effort, but things weren't looking good for you when I arrived. I had a plan, Sasuke said defensively, becoming absorbed into his thoughts as he stared at the red carpet. Floor. Technically yes, he did have a plan, albeit one that would have put him in harm's way. Genma wasn't wrong in saying they were in trouble, but the last thing Sasuke wanted to do was admit weakness. Naruto appeared to be having a similar struggle in his head. The blonde started to say something, but decided against it and crossed his arms. Genma smiled. I'm sure you did, Sasuke. But either way, your father would have had my head if anything happened to you too. He laughed nervously as Tsunami threw him a horrified look. I'm only joking about that last part. That's for sure. Sakura shuddered. We saw 2 hidden mist assassins and we haven't even been here a full day yet. Quote. But, Kakashi held up a finger. I'm going to prepare us for what's coming. Genma still has some time before he's supposed to report back to the Leaf, so he'll be tagging along with us. Where are we going? Naruto asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Out into the forest for some training, Kakashi said. He staggered. Oh, and I seem to have used my Sharingan a bit too recklessly back there. I'll recover with a little rest. Quote. Genma hoisted Kakashi up on his weaker side. Have you got anything to help him walk? Tazuna cupped his chin. We should have crutches around here somewhere. Let me check the closet. He exited the room, leaving the guests with Tsunami. She turned to the 2 Jonin with a smile. I'll bring you 2 some food. Just take a seat. Thank you, ma'am, Genma said. He ushered Kakashi over to an open spot by the table. You'll be better in no time, sensei, Naruto encouraged as Kakashi stared down at his steaming bowl of food. Then we'll kick those mist bad guys' butts. Fat chance. Everyone turned to see a boy no older than 10 in a fisherman's hat and green overalls. He regarded the group with palpable disdain. Sasuke felt something in him stir when he saw the familiar expression on the child's face, but he pushed his emotions aside in favor of an empty stare. Inari. Tsunami chided, hands on her. Inari hurried across the room to hug Tazuna, welcoming him home. Then he turned to face Tsunami's displeased frown. Don't be rude. These guests are the ninja who escorted your grandfather home. Inari blinked, taking in her words. Mom, these guys are going to die. They can't beat Gato and his men. Why would you say something like that? She asked. Because it's true. Anyone who goes up against those thugs dies. This time won't be any different. He started toward the double doors Kakashi and Genma had entered through, but stopped when Tazuna asked, Inari, where are you going? Quote. The sea. I'll be looking at the sea. The boy disappeared through the doors so fast, he may as well have been a ninja himself. Inari, come back here and apologize. His mother shouted. He didn't return. Tsunami took a long breath and put a hand to her chest, as if holding back tears. Tazuna was quick to apologize for his grandson's behavior. Kakashi waved him off. No, it's alright. I understand how unimpressive this looks. A Jonin like me, down for the count after one encounter. Not the biggest confidence builder. Naruto frowned and balled his fists. But sensei. Sasuke looked to Kakashi, whose unassuming smile was noticeable even through his mask. He was strong, as expected of a Jonin, but using the Sharingan seemed to have taken a lot out of him. More than Sasuke would have expected. The stories about an Uchiha body being key to wielding the Sharingan to its full potential must have been true after all. Although, it was worth noting that Kakashi still somehow mustered up the energy to devour his food and put his mask back on while everyone was looking away. Excuse me, miss, Sakura said, raising a hand. Sasuke shook his head at her ever-present teacher's pet attitude. They weren't even in their home village anymore, let alone in class. Who's this? Quote. She pointed to a photograph of the family, but with a fourth individual they hadn't met smiling next to Inari. He was a tall, dark-haired man with a body like a sturdy tree. His skin appeared firm and calloused, no doubt from a life of labor. Tsunami's eyes pooled with tears when she saw the photograph. Tazuna jumped in to shift everyone's attention away from her silent suffering, and she gave him a grateful smile. That man is why Inari became so worked up. His name was Kaiza. He was my husband. Tsunami managed to get out, her back turned to the group. The bridge builder told Kaiza's story, and the team listened with rapt attention. Kaiza was a traveling fisherman who saved Inari from drowning one day. He set an example for Inari of how to be brave, and in time began living among the people of the village. Sasuke noted how Tazuna's face lit up while he spoke. This was the first time since they met the crotchety old man that there was any semblance of that look in his eyes. Hope was a fire that could keep you going through any hardship. Sasuke knew this better than anyone, considering he lost his long ago. In time, Kaiza married Tsunami and settled down as part of the family. He brought pride and strength back to the people of this land. He urged them to protect the things they loved with both arms. However, one day, he was taken prisoner by Gato's thugs. Kaiza was beaten and publicly executed as a message to anyone who might try to resist living under Gato's rule. Sasuke swallowed hard at the end of the tale, then glanced sideways at Naruto. He appeared rattled by this news, and had retreated into himself for the moment. Far less surprised or shaken than Naruto or Sakura, the young Uchiha lounged on the floor, deep in thought. Men with power always trod upon the weak. Those they couldn't subdue alone, they ganged up on. Kaiza was proof of that. Inari understood this as well, even at such a young age. Still, something about this didn't sit right with Sasuke. While he'd rather not get involved, it seemed like the right move to act. He rose from the floor and dusted off his pants. I'll talk to him, he heard himself say before he had given it a second thought. Everyone turned to him. Naruto's mouth was hanging open and Sasuke cringed at the sight of his half-chewed food. Surprise was evident in Kakashi's visible eye. Are you sure, Sasuke? The Jonin said. Caught in the spotlight with little time to think, the Uchiha hung his head. Yeah, he whispered before walking toward the door Inari used with all eyes on him. Like it or not, he was locked into this situation now. He could only hope it didn't go horribly wrong. The look on Sasuke Uchiha's face the moment the young boy walked through his door gave Inoichi pause. Sasuke plodded toward his usual spot on the couch and fell into place without ceremony. He didn't make eye contact. The only sound for the better part of 30 seconds was a ticking clock on the wall. Sasuke, the Yamanaka initiated, what's happened? Sasuke hesitated before opening his mouth to say something. Inoichi would have bet several thousand ryo on the word, nothing, if past sessions, and Sasuke's current facial expression, were anything to go by. The Uchiha froze when he noticed his therapist's hard gaze. Inoichi held up a finger. Remember what we said. A heavy sigh escaped Sasuke before he recited the words, "No, nothing's allowed." Right, Inoichi said, smiling at him. Good. So go on, then. The boy's hands formed tiny fists. I yelled at Naruto the other day. Inoichi pursed his lips. What about? Take me through it from the beginning, like we practiced. What happened, how you felt, how I reacted, and why. Sasuke finished with a groan. Yeah, I know. So, we were moving the last of my things into the house. Minato took an empty cardboard box from Kushina's outstretched arms and put it in a corner beside several others. He made a hand sign, faced a spot on the floor where his Flying Thunder God seal was applied to a paper tag, and summoned the final two boxes. He turned as Naruto and Sasuke entered the room. The latter was slouching, the weight of his recent tragedy reflected in his body language. That's everything, Minato said with a smile. Sasuke, Kushina and I will go handle the furniture in the next room. Naruto, stay here and help him unpack some of the lighter boxes. Alright, you got it, Naruto said with a toothy grin. Sasuke's sunken facial expression brightened a little. Thank you, Lord Minato. It's our pleasure, Kushina said. She tugged Minato by the arm. Let's hurry before dinner time, ya know. Surveying the dozen boxes of varying sizes, Sasuke pointed to one. I'll start with this one. Naruto marched over to another box on the opposite wall. Okay, and I'll open this one. We'll finish this in no time. Believe it. Eyes flashing with determination, he tore the packing tape away and reached in to dig out the contents. Careful, please, Sasuke warned. His concern went unheeded until he cleared his throat. Oh, Naruto stammered, scratching his head, sorry. They unpacked in relative silence. Sasuke stepped out for a moment to use the restroom, having unpacked two boxes, save for a few heavier items he would need Minato or Kushina to help lift. When he came back, Naruto was on his fourth box. This one was longer and flatter than the ones he'd opted for the last 3 times. He struggled a bit to lift whatever was stuck inside. Curious, Sasuke approached and peered over Naruto's shoulder. The young Uchiha's eyes widened at the sight of the object in his new brother's hands. Naruto freed it from its jammed position and raised it with a triumphant cry, grinning with pride, only to deflate in the face of the scalding expressio. Staring back at him. What do you think you're doing? Sasuke shouted. His veins pulsed with a rush of anger that overwhelmed him in seconds. On the side of the oblong box, there was a label where he'd inked the words, "Do not open." A label that it was apparent Naruto never bothered to read. Don't touch that. The blonde boy stepped back, speechless with shock. He held a polished wooden bow in his hands. Naruto didn't resist as Sasuke jerked the weapon from him and held it close to his chest. Still fuming, he stuffed it back into the box and tried to shut the flaps. The tape gave way and they sprang free again, adding to his vexation. Why did you open it? Didn't you read the label? He snapped again, trembling with rage. What's going on in here? Asked a firm voice. Sasuke flinched at the realization that Minato had teleported and now stood beside them, his eyes shifting from one boy to the other. Gulping back anger, Sasuke fought to calm his voice before giving an explanation. Naruto opened this box, he said, pointing to the self-explanatory label. I don't want anyone but me touching what's in there. Kushina stumbled into the room mid-explanation. Minato assessed the evidence, then leveled his gaze on Naruto. Naruto, please apologize to Sasuke. Sasuke, I'm going to have to ask you to do the same. We don't raise our voices at each other that way in this house, no matter what's happened. Sasuke bit his lip, guilt hitting him as the reality of what he'd just done set in. He turned away. I'm sorry, Naruto. Hey, Kushina cut in, hold on. You should look at each other when you apologize, ya know. Inoichi stood by on the opposite side of the room, watching alongside Sasuke as his recollection of events played out. A past version of Sasuke bowed his head in shame and expressed regret for his actions. Naruto did the same, with Kushina keeping a strong grip on the back of his neck to ensure he didn't try to weasel out of the situation. Having seen enough, Inoichi turned and looked down at the real Sasuke, who watched the scene with an impassive expression. I think we've seen enough, don't you? Inoichi asked, waiting until the boy nodded and looked at him. So, we've gone through what happened, and you already told me a little about how you felt. Now tell me, why did you react this way, Sasuke? Sasuke sighed and grumbled something Inoichi couldn't hear. He grimaced under the man's watchful gaze. Inoichi's eyebrow arched, conveying his interest in what Sasuke was keeping from him. I don't want to, Sasuke admitted, his lips folding to a thin crease. Inoichi turned back to the replaying memory. I know, but the source of your pain is what we need to tackle in order for you to feel better. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but we'll need to come back to things that cause you emotional blockage. He frowned and looked down at his client, whose eyes were tightly shut. The fact you mentioned this to me at all means even you must recognize that it had an impact on you. Sasuke scoffed. You would have noticed something was off and pushed me, anyway. Quote. Inoichi closed his eyes to concentrate and opened them to the sight of Fugaku Uchiha's residence. The day was bright and sunny. Any evidence of the recent massacre was nowhere to be seen. A smiling Sasuke hurried down the paved street skirting the grounds, the bow from the previous memory secured. To his back, he ran right through Inoichi, stopping in front of the main exit. He retrieved his bow from its quiver and stood with a hand on his hip, watching the door. A voice called out, I'm off, from inside. Out stepped Itachi Uchiha, dressed in his combat gear. He paused in the doorway. You, Itachi whispered, stopping and staring at Sasuke in shock. I heard you're going on a wild boar hunt, big brother. Quote. Itachi slid the door shut behind him and strode down the path. Sasuke followed a few paces behind, smiling bigger than Inoichi had ever seen. I heard it's big like a monster, the boy went on, and it's been tearing up fields. Isn't that where you're headed now, to take it down? The elder brother continued walking with purpose toward his destination. But you're going alone, right? Let me come with you. You know I'm a good archer. I've gone hunting with you before. Without a word, Itachi turned and shooed him back toward the house. When Sasuke approached anyway, he reached out and gave him a light tap on the forehead with 2 fingers. Sorry, Sasuke. Next time. In a blur of movement, Itachi sped away from Sasuke and scaled a building, hopping across rooftops. What? Sasuke panicked. Wait for me. Determined not to be left behind, he bolted down the path and disappeared around a corner. Inoichi looked to his right, where Sasuke stood watching with a pained expression as the flashback played out. Seeing himself on better terms with his brother must have eaten away at him in a way that was impossible to understand. Inoichi hated being the reason for the boy going through so much pain, but if this helped in the end, it would be worthwhile. Their surroundings shimmered, almost losing form. He snapped his fingers. Sasuke, you're losing focus. I know this is hard for you. When you're ready, skip us forward. Remember that you control the memory. I'm just your guide. Granted, he could force more of the memory out of Sasuke's mind if he were so inclined, but something told him what little trust he'd earned so far would vanish with that revelation. Sasuke whispered to himself, distracted by something. Realizing Inoichi was watching him, he explained, I said it's just like with archery, I guess. How so? A few seconds passed as Sasuke concentrated, pushing them from the Uchiha Manor to a new location. Inoichi recognized a grassy field on the outskirts of the leaf. An out-of-breath Sasuke with the bow still strapped to his back stopped to recover. Itachi sat perched atop one of several houses, and the brothers were having a conversation. When you fire a bow, current Sasuke continued, you line it up with a spot on your face. It's called the anchor point. So, that's what you are for me, right? You're my guide. Inoichi nodded, and was surprised to see the boy's mouth curl into a faint smile. Yes, exactly. Sasuke turned back to the sight of his past self ambling up the side of the building. A large boar with massive tusks and a sizable scar across its back was pacing nearby. The beast appeared agitated by something, and had already done a significant amount of damage to its surrounding. NGS. Inoichi noted that its scar was old and had healed over, so that couldn't have been the cause. Nevertheless, it continued to roar and stomp about. Sasuke dropped his head so that hair hid his expression. This was one of the best days I ever had with Itachi. You know, when he was still his old self. After this mission, he helped me with my shuriken training and taught me how to hit moving targets with my bow. Quote, and you miss it? The way things were. The question seemed to cut deep. Sasuke flinched and was quiet for a long moment. In the distance, the boar uttered still more cries as it charged the brothers head on. I didn't mean I missed it, Sasuke finally answered. I don't want to use that bow anymore. I haven't ever since what happened to the Uchiha. Why not? The leaf analysis team lead had a pretty good idea why not, but Sasuke needed to face the truth of his own accord. Sasuke watched the encounter with the boar play out until he couldn't bear to look any longer. Because it reminds me of a time that was all just a lie. That wasn't the real Itachi, but even now, it seems so real to me. Quote, sometimes people twisted memories more in favor of their skewed interpretations. Inoichi knew there was no point saying as much, so he kept quiet. It makes me feel sad, like I lost something that I never really had to begin with. But that's not all. It also makes me angry. Is that why when Naruto touched the bow, you lashed out at him? Sasuke looked up again. His face was red and tears trickled down his face. He was trembling with the weight of his building emotion. The expression on his face made the answer to Inoichi's question clear. Instead of pushing him to speak, he gave Sasuke a soft pat on the back. Look, Sasuke, until you move past this pain you're keeping inside and accept what is, you'll just be holding yourself back. You have skills that you should be honing, and they have nothing to do with your brother being who you thought he was or not. The Uchiha didn't answer. Sighing, Inoichi snapped again. Alright, that's enough for today. We'll revisit this, but for now you should rest and think about what I've said. Sasuke remained silent as he dissolved the memory and their minds returned to the present. Sasuke ascended the stairs as quietly as possible, not wanting to alarm Inari. He was a stranger in the kid's home, after all. He took slow and measured steps. If he were being honest, the purpose of this was partially to allow himself more time to think. Why had he volunteered to do something like this in the first place? What would he even say? He hesitated at the door to Inari's room. It was open just a crack, but enough to see inside. Out of respect, Sasuke didn't peek. He raised a hand to knock, but paused at the sound of something unexpected. Was Inari crying? Figuring it was better to just rip the bandage off, he knocked and waited while the boy's sniffles subsided. Soft footsteps approached the door. When it creaked open and Inari saw Sasuke, his curious stare hardened. There were streaks on his face where he'd done a poor job of wiping away tears. What do you want? Inari snapped. Taking a breath, Sasuke dove in headfirst. I heard about your dad. I'm here to talk to you. The kid's face contorted at the mention of Kaiza. I don't even know you. Why don't you leaf ninja just go home? His harsh attitude wasn't totally undeserved in this case, but still, Sasuke couldn't help but see a bit of himself in the boy's situation. Inari, was it? The boy gave a curt nod. Well, Inari, I wanted you to know that I get it. My parents were both killed. Inari froze, taking in his words. When I was around your age, they were killed by an evil man who wanted power. Quote, swallowing hard, Inari returned to his defiant glare. Okay. So what? What's that got to do with me? I'm just saying I understand. I understand why you feel the way you do about this. Like it's hopeless, but it's not. Inari had inched backward during the discussion. The door was open a hair wider. He and Sasuke seemed to notice this involuntary action at the same time. Trying to save face, Inari stepped forward again, shutting the door. Go away, came his muffled words. Sasuke sighed, slipped his hands into his pockets, and started back down the hallway toward the stairs. He may have made things even worse, but at least he tried, right? This was stupid to begin with, but Kushina would probably be proud of him right now. Inoichi, too. Maybe he'd been right before about wanting to keep to himself. Kindness rarely got you any kind of. Inari's door creaked open. Sasuke turned to see his tiny head peeking out from within. Hey, the boy said in a meek voice. If you really want to come in, I guess you can. Once again, Inoichi welcomed Sasuke into his office and waited as he settled into the same seat he'd sat in since he was 8 years old. In the 2 years since he started counseling sessions, Sasuke had progressed by leaps and bounds. Still, his usual aloofness remained a cornerstone of his personality. Good morning, Sasuke said with a deadpan expression. He was speaking first these days. That was something, Inoichi supposed. Good morning, Sasuke. How are you feeling? All right. However, short responses were a hill they still hadn't surmounted. Inoichi threw him a look. Sasuke scrunched his face up in irritation. What? The Uchiha said. I didn't say nothing. The Yamanaka wagged a finger. No one-word answers. There are no loopholes here, young man. Quote. Fine. Sasuke rolled his shoulders and sat up straighter. Today has been okay so far. We had family dinner, then Naruto and I talked for a little while before I came here. What did you talk about with Naruto? Quote. He asked me if I wanted to go to Ichiraku later. Inoichi flashed a knowing smile. Almost any conversation Sasuke had with Naruto started this way and they both knew it. He told me Lady Kushina was going on a trip with him tomorrow to see the ruins of the land of Eddies, and he wants to train with me when they get back. Yeah, that's about it. Then I headed here. Good job, Sasuke. He scoffed at the praise, rolling his eyes. An expressive lift of the eyebrows was all Inoichi needed to nudge his client in the right direction. The boy sighed. And how was your morning, Mr. Inoichi? Inoichi grinned. There we go. Thank you for asking. He went into a brief explanation about how he and Ino did brain training exercises before he left for work. Sasuke was able to show genuine interest, ask probing questions, and relate things Inoichi said to his own experiences as they shifted to a discussion of hobbies in general. His progression so far was very encouraging, despite the room he still had to grow. However, as they always eventually did, today was the day they were going back to the sore spot Sasuke avoided. So, the Yamanaka transitioned, holding Sasuke's gaze. Picked up any of your old hobbies lately? Quote. The Uchiha pouted. Mr. Inoichi, I told you we'll keep coming back to this, Sasuke. Every few weeks until we've cracked that shell of yours. I don't have a shell, Sasuke muttered, burying his face in his crossed arms. Inoichi splayed his arms across the windowsill behind him, leaning back into a more comfortable position. I think we both know that's not true. Silence filled the room. Sasuke kept his head tucked for a long time, and Inoichi waited with unbending patience. In past sessions, he sometimes changed the subject to give Sasuke a break. Today, Inoichi was going to push him a little. The boy looked up, at long last, and asked in a low voice, are we going back inside that memory? Quote. I won't force you. Except for during dangerous situations, mind transfers into the minds of comrades should always be voluntary. That's the code I live by and the one I've passed on to my daughter. Either you and I can talk about things here, or we can deal with them in there. Take your pick. Sasuke's response was a stiff grumble. Inoichi went on. Of course, you can always leave for the day. But I'll keep coming back to this, as you should know by now. Sasuke sat forward. I'll go back in. His delivery was much more confident than expected. Inoichi held onto the hope that today would be the day of Sasuke's breakthrough. Once again, the boar hunt was reenacted in Sasuke's mind. Inoichi watched next to present-day Sasuke in a field a few yards away. Itachi voiced his surprise that Sasuke caught up to him, as he had every time before, to which Sasuke eagerly revealed, "I've been training." He climbed the building where his older brother crouched watching the boar. They proceeded to orchestrate a plan for redirecting it away from nearby settlements. An arrow flew through the air, missing the tail of the boar by a few feet. No doubt, the young boy's nerves had gotten the better of him. Beside Inoichi, Sasuke shivered as he watched the scene play out, shutting his eyes and gritting his teeth. "You know what I'm going to say," Inoichi prompted. Sasuke nodded. "Control your breathing, feel the feelings, and let them flow out of you." His fingers curled while he carried out this process. Distortions that had formed in the space around them cleared up as his breathing leveled out. "Good," Inoichi said, nudging the boy. "You're getting the hang of this. Now, let's, The environment around them transitioned to a new space. Wherever they were, it was nighttime. Everything came into focus bit by bit, revealing they were on a street in the Uchiha district. A past version of Sasuke fell to one knee on a paved path, the fabric of his shirt torn at the shoulder. Abandoned ninja tools scattered around the battlefield depicted the grisly fates of scores of fallen Uchiha clan members. Fresh blood splatters adorned the walls of the buildings around them, and there were corpses as far as the eye could see. The powerful stench of death came through as clearly as if this were the real world. Any Yamanaka worth his salt knew that smells were an undeniable sign of a potent memory. Inoichi rubbed his chin. Why are we back at the night of the massacre? They'd visited this point in time more than once, of course, but this particular part of it was new. Stranger still, Sasuke didn't get so shaken up over this night's events anymore. It was more in line with his reshaped view of Itachi, after all. So why were they here? Inoichi struggled with the new dilemma in front of him. Should he stop the hidden memory from playing out, or let Sasuke explore it further? Glancing toward the boy at his side, he saw the Uchiha was trembling, eyes still shut. Whatever this memory contained, he'd kept it buried deep for a reason. This wasn't a conscious shift, that much was for sure. Last to materialize was Itachi himself, who turned away after revealing his new and improved Mangekyo Sharingan to Sasuke. If appearances were any indication, he'd attempted to knock his younger brother out cold a moment ago, but failed. Itachi jumped to a rooftop, but was pursued without delay. "No, wait," Sasuke cried as his brother fled. Inoichi noticed something unusual as the child got to his feet. Present-day Sasuke watched alongside him, just as stunned as his memory guide. Past Sasuke's eyes activated their latent Sharingan. He snatched up a few kunai from his surroundings and gave chase, throwing them with precise aim. Itachi turned in time to see the projectiles coming, but was not quick enough to avoid being hit. He was forced to draw his sword to deflect them, but his leaf headband fell off in the process. Landing beside it, he bent to pick the headband up and retied it sideways. Behind him, Sasuke knelt, panting and watching in silence as his brother tied the fabric into a knot before turning to look CK at him. Then the unthinkable happened. All of the breath in Inoichi's lungs left him. He didn't need to check to know the same was true for Sasuke. Itachi cried. Waking up in his own body again, Inoichi lowered his hands and took a breath. He spotted Sasuke wiping tears from his face and rising from his seat. "Hey, Sasuke. Hold on." The Yamanaka shook off the haze that was common when readjusting to his body, then pushed himself up from his seat and followed Sasuke. The latter's hand was already on the doorknob when Inoichi grabbed his shoulder. This could be important. Unlocking repressed memories is a sure sign that you're making good progress. "I don't know," Sasuke whispered. His voice wavered. A click sounded from beyond the door and it swung open. Light from the hallway spilled into the cozy space, leaving a sniffling Sasuke fully exposed to the outside world. Hey Dad, I brought you lunch early, because I know you're busy, and Ino pranced into the room, her long blonde hair pinned up in a ponytail, a lunchbox in one hand. Sasuke. Inoichi grunted. He stepped in front of Sasuke. Sorry, Ino. Bad time. Leave it in one of the lockers, please. Oh okay, Ino said with uncertainty, tiptoeing out of the room. Sorry to interrupt. Love you. She closed the door after Inoichi responded in kind. The deepening curiosity on her face as she turned to walk away left him concerned. How could she not be curious? No one in the village other than the Hokage and his family, the council, and Inoichi himself knew a thing about Sasuke's therapy sessions. Not to mention that she had a maddening crush on the kid. Some days, he was all she talked about. Refocusing, Inoichi turned to check on Sasuke. He was already stepping around him and bolting for the door. I can't do this. Sasuke disappeared through the doorway, leaving Inoichi to stare at the floor in confusion. Looks like there's more going on here than I thought. Sasuke stood still in the hallway outside of Inari's room for a moment, overcome by genuine shock. Well, are you coming in or not? The brat pressed, raising a hand to keep his fisherman's hat from sliding off. Sasuke power walked back the other way and let himself in. Inari closed the door behind him. Seeing his visitor standing awkwardly in the corner, Inari motioned toward a rather plain-looking bed with sea green covers. You can sit, he offered. Inari was far less hostile now. While Sasuke was by no means scared of some shrimp with an attitude, it was a nice change of atmosphere compared to before. Was that how he made Naruto feel? Yet again, he found himself drawing silly parallels between himself and Inari. Thanks, Sasuke said as he settled onto the bed. He had to admit, it was much more comfortable than it looked. In fact, it was so soft that he almost lost track of why he was here until Inari sat down next to him and spoke. I'm sorry I yelled at you. It's no big deal. Naruto, you know, the idiot downstairs with the blonde hair. He's a lot louder and more annoying. What's your name? Sasuke. Sasuke Uchiha. Uchiha, you mean like that clan that was. Sasuke was taken aback. So, it seemed that even way out here in the land of waves, his clan's fate was common knowledge. Shelving the pain, he nodded. Yeah, that clan. He let the moment hang. I came to talk to you because I've been where you are. After they were gone, and I was all alone, I remember wanting to give up, too. Quote, dark thoughts crept into Sasuke's mind as he reflected on the memory of his brother's betrayal. He clenched his fists, holding onto Inari's covers with a death grip. But you didn't give up, right? I mean, you became a ninja. Sasuke slowed his breathing the way Inoichi taught him. He sighed, letting his pain flow out of him and flexing his fingers. When the moment passed, he turned to see Inari's curious eyes scrutinizing him. Are you okay? The kid probed, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, sorry. I got lost in my head. Sasuke shook himself back into focus. I became a ninja because I had a goal. I realized I didn't have time to be scared, or to second guess myself. Quote, he took care to leave out that his goal was to take revenge by murdering his older brother. Something told him that wasn't the best first impression to leave on an innocent child. So you're saying that's what I need to do? Quote, that's right. But I'm not brave like Dad was, Inari muttered, hanging his head. His little body shook. Sasuke didn't need to see his face to know he must have been crying again. I'm a big crybaby. Quote, raising a hand, Sasuke moved it toward Inari's shoulder. He forced himself to complete the gesture, patting the boy in what he hoped was a comforting way. The same way Minato and Inoichi had once done for him. He waited for a nasty reaction that never came. You know, he said amidst the child's sniffles, you don't need to cry all the time. There are different ways to deal with pain. Dad used to tell me not to cry, and to be brave. He was a hero. Inari's words came out garbled as he sobbed, but Sasuke caught enough of them to piece the sentences together. How am I supposed to believe in heroes when he's dead? What would Minato or Kushina do right now? What would Inoichi do? Sasuke didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent. I saw it, Inari whispered after some time. His well of tears was all dried up, and his words came out coarse and weak. I saw Gato's men kill Dad. He did it right in front of us, to show us all that it was pointless. Dad couldn't save us, and you guys can't either. Sasuke hadn't come here to be a hero. He was just out to complete the mission and get stronger. Still, he felt he owed this kid some form of encouragement. Inari, I'm not going to make you any unrealistic promises. But one thing I know is that I'm not gonna die here. Turning to Sasuke, the boy asked, how do you know that? Quote, because like I told you, I have a goal. I can't lose hope, and I can't die before I reach that goal. Sasuke steeled his gaze. Everything around him vanished and he saw only the piercing red irises of his older brother's face, which was devoid of emotion. What's with your eyes, Sasuke? They're all red. Finding himself back in the room with Inari, Sasuke gasped. He looked away, all of a sudden conscious of his Sharingan. He hadn't meant for them to activate. In all honesty, he had no idea how to will it to happen at all. Or how to turn them off. Thinking about his hate for Itachi must have triggered them as part of an automatic response. I didn't mean to. Quote. The Uchiha closed his eyes, focused all of his mental energy on making his Sharingan go away, and then looked at Inari again. Are they gone? When he nodded, Sasuke sighed. That was my Sharingan. It looks cool, Inari said with a small smile. Sasuke sat for a moment and pondered the comment. Yeah, I guess it does. He'd never thought about his clan's ability that way, especially given the events of that night. About what I said, he went on, if you can find a goal to strive for, it won't feel so hopeless anymore. It's like how your father used to say to protect things with both arms. Inari squirmed, but Sasuke continued. My adoptive mother always says you have to fill your heart with love to survive bad times. I think what they're both getting at is that you should hold on to the things and people that mean something to you. Quote. His words seemed to reach the boy. Inari nodded and his eyes went vacant as he receded into his own thoughts. Sasuke hoped he'd done some good, but it was hard to tell. This kind of thing wasn't exactly his forte. Well, Sasuke said, hopping to his feet, I'm gonna go back out there. But wait, Inari said, clutching Sasuke's wrist warmer. How is someone like me supposed to fight? I'm weak, and I don't have ninja training. All I know how to do is catch fish and hunt. There are other ways to stand up for what matters besides fighting, Inari. As for me, I decided a long time ago that I'm never going to run or hide. You have to make that decision for yourself. Quote. Sasuke noticed a crossbow laid by Inari's bedside out of the corner of his eye. He left the room and closed the door behind him, but couldn't get the image out of his head. His many talks with Inoichi about the bow he used to practice with echoed in his mind. Sasuke descended the stairs and rejoined his team, halfway paying attention while everyone bombarded him with questions about how talking with Inari went. He scraped together the food left in his bowl, then brought it to his lips and frowned. It was cold. Guess that's the price I pay for being nice. Good morning, Mr. Inoichi, Sasuke said before taking his seat on the couch that was forever marked by him, thanks to the many hours he spent sitting there. He settled into the form-fitting impression on the seat cushion and gave his therapist a slight smile. Caught off guard by his optimistic aura, Inoichi sat forward and matched it with a smile of his own. Good morning, Sasuke. I heard you and Naruto graduated. How are you feeling today? When Inoichi first sat down to speak with Sasuke, he never expected him to make as much progress as he had in their 5 years together. His initial visit proved him to be a very closed-off, emotional mess, and justifiably so. Granted, Sasuke still dealt with his painful memories of the Uchiha massacre, but now he could talk about it without going into a rage or shutting down. If the historical records about the Uchiha that Minato managed to dig up were any indication, then Sasuke was one bad experience away from going the way of someone like Madara Uchiha. Inoichi's long-standing orders, however difficult they might be to carry out, were to keep that from happening through non-destructive methods. I feel alright, Sasuke said. You seem better than alright. Greeting me with a smile. Saying good morning first. What have you done with my client? Hey, I guess you're right. I am feeling pretty good lately. Mostly thanks to you. Inoichi laughed, waving off the praise. Thank you, Sasuke, but no. I can't take the credit. Sasuke shrugged. I only made it this far because of our sessions. Quote, even so, your progress is due to the work you did here, and the choices you made. Don't lose sight of that. Right, Sasuke said, nodding and adopting a pensive look. Speaking of progress, I have something to tell you. Quote, the leader raised his eyebrows. Oh, yeah, I think that I'm ready to stop our therapy sessions. Inoichi took in a long breath and then let it out the same way he taught Sasuke. Anxiety rippled through him like tiny needles. He hadn't realized it until now, but he'd come to enjoy these hours with Sasuke quite a bit. They'd both known this day would come, but time had a way of slipping by without you noticing until moments like this crept up on you. He thought he'd learned to accept that with age, and yet now he found himself overcome with sadness. Well, that's quite a way to open this session, Inoichi said, laughing off his nerves to keep from getting emotional. Sasuke laughed with him. The pure ridiculousness of the moment hit like a ton of bricks. Sasuke was laughing with him. Well, Sasuke said, I've been thinking about it and it just seems like that time. I'm about to go on my first away mission, I'm not having nightmares anymore, and I can deal with the bore thing now. So I think I'll be okay. Ah, Inoichi said, holding up a finger. Though there is one unsolved mystery left. Quote, Sasuke nodded, looking at his feet with a thin-lipped expression. My Sharingan. As I've said before, I think that blocked memory of yours was keeping you from using it until now. My guess is it's tied to your inability to use Flying Thunder God without feeling sick, as well. Your eyes were probably trying to use the Sharingan as a reflex when you performed time-space jumps, and hitting a wall because of the mental block. Your Sharingan should manifest itself under the right conditions, or perhaps just with time. Which reminds me. He paused for emphasis. Sasuke craned his neck forward, paying full attention. Be careful out there, Sasuke. I know you are strong for your age, but strength isn't all that makes a great ninja. Quote, if anyone knows that, it's me, the Uchiha said with a nonchalant wave. I'll be careful out there, I promise. I'm ready. And does this mean you're also ready to use you-know-what again? Inoichi asked, ending the sentence with a hopeful uptick. Sasuke's brow furrowed, making it obvious he was less than pleased. Again, they'd both known this moment would come. The subject was always lingering at the back of Inoichi's mind, and he made sure Sasuke knew that. He wasn't about to let their sessions end without one last mention of the bow. Yeah, Sasuke said after a long pause. He slapped his hands against his knees, as if to psych himself up, and delivered another unusual smile. I'm ready for that. I was planning to try it out when I got a chance. The boy's words felt like a dream, but they warmed Inoichi's heart. He'd cracked that shell of trauma at last. Now it was time to let Sasuke leave the nest, as cheesy as that sounded. Well, okay, Inoichi relented, rising from his seat. I don't see a reason to have you stay here for the full hour, unless you just want to keep this old man company. Sasuke chuckled. I hadn't planned to leave early, but yeah. I guess there's no point dragging it out. He froze, as if mulling something very important over. Instead of speaking, he stood up and looked at Inoichi head on. Thank you. I know I was a handful all these years. But now I think I'll be okay. Unsure what was professional in this sort of situation, Inoichi put an arm around Sasuke's shoulder and squeezed. You're welcome, Sasuke. Thank you, too. I've learned just as much from you as you have from me. Quote. Sasuke nodded, his embarrassment plain to see, but he didn't shy away from the half-hug. A once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, for sure. Now go on, Inoichi said, patting his back, get out of here. Inoichi sucked in tears that tried to fall while his client walked away for the last time. He couldn't recall feeling this proud of a child since the time he watched his own daughter take her first independent steps. Sasuke was gone now, but there was no doubt in his mind that the boy was going places. Inoichi couldn't wait to see how the cards fell. Lord Hokage, he's back in your hands now. What do you mean we're learning tree walking? Sasuke heard Naruto say on his way back from putting his used bowl in the sink. That's right, Kakashi said. He rose from the table, supporting himself with a pair of wooden crutches. I'll teach you all the basics of how to. Naruto and I already know how to do that, Sasuke cut in. He strode past their sensei and took his seat at the table. Huh, Kakashi said. Really? Genma answered for him. Yeah, actually, Lord Fourth had Iwashi and I work on it with them a couple of years ago. He felt they were ready. Tree walking, Sakura said, a finger against her chin. Wait, I think I remember reading something about that in our textbook. Well, Sakura, Kakashi said in a cheerful tone, that's precisely what we're going to go over. Genma, since you three have already got a good rapport, you'll be teaching Naruto and Sasuke. Teaching them what? Genma stood and waited for Kakashi to whisper the answer into his ear. Ah, I see. We never got around to that. Well, come on then, boys. Kakashi hobbled out of the house with Sakura in tow, and Genma started after them, only to stop when he saw Sasuke heading into another room. Naruto looked between them, unsure what to do. Sasuke. Genma called out. 1 second. Sasuke said over his shoulder. I forgot something. He walked into the room where they'd been allowed to set up a temporary sleeping arrangement and change out of their gear. Taking a moment to concentrate, Sasuke formed a hand sign and, in the blink of an eye, went from one place to another. Looking down, he was pleased to see the flying thunder god seal he'd placed at the center of his room left undisturbed. He focused on the sensation of chakra coursing through him, traveling through his natural pathways until it reached his eyes. The Sharingan was active. He didn't need to see a reflection to know. Seeing his room with these new eyes was a mind-blowing experience. Not only could he see every imperfection in the floor, walls, and furniture, or the smallest of insects crawling around in the shadows, but he could also see where he'd missed vacuuming up dust and debris. These eyes were something else. And to think I've had them this whole time. He let out a relieved sigh. Not feeling like throwing up after teleporting was a welcome change, too. Bonus points to Inoichi. Staying on task, he searched his closet for the oblong box that was now caked with a film of dust and lifted it out of its crevice. He placed the box on his bed and lifted out the bow, followed by an assortment of arrows lining the bottom. He pulled open a drawer on the opposite wall where he'd stored his old quiver. Although the fit was on the tighter side, he was able to put it on. Sasuke stared at the bow for a long time before reaching out and giving its frame a tentative caress. He picked it up once more, this time attempting to assume the proper stance. Faint traces of stored knowledge and muscle memory he'd pushed away for so long seeped to the forefront of his mind. He used to feel free, comfortable, and in his own private zone whenever this bow was in his hand. Now it felt different. Its body, an unfamiliar instrument. Its texture, like sandpaper against soft fabric. He tensed up, fighting through the initial discomfort until he found the right positioning of the bow. Sasuke's fingertips curled around the bow's frame and found their place along one of the grooves in the handle. His dominant hand pulled back. On a whim, he tried knocking one of the arrows on the bed, reached full draw, and held the position. In that instant, all of his awkwardness washed away. This felt right. Years later, and still, this felt so right. He'd found his anchor point. Naruto barged in as Sasuke was stowing his bow in its quiver, having just teleported to one of the kunai he left in the guest room. Hey, Sasuke, what's keepin' ya? The blonde stood, dumbfounded, as Sasuke turned to him with a blank expression. Whoa, where'd you get that? I didn't see you pack it before we left. I didn't, the Uchiha explained. I just jumped home to pick these things up and came back. And you didn't bring me any Ichiraku? Sasuke gave him a flat, unamused stare. Just kidding, geez. Naruto shook his head. Anyway, wow, what brought this on? I haven't seen you use that thing since. Well, he went silent at the thought of Sasuke's past blowup. I know, Sasuke said, saving his adoptive brother the trouble of having to find his words. All that's behind me. I'm trying something new from here on. Anyway, should we go? Naruto beamed and held out a thumbs up. You bet. Believe it. 12 belly of the beast. The day was bright and sunny. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura walked along a dirt path through the forest behind Kakashi and Genma. Birds chirped and bugs buzzed from within the lush forest, creating a tranquil vibe. Naruto looked around, wide-eyed, observing all that this new land had to offer. The land of waves, forest was similar to that of the leaf. However, tall, spindly trees took the place of the more sturdy ones found back home, and there was so much moisture here, even the air felt wet. Naruto's baggy outfit stuck to him like glue whenever he exerted himself even a little bit. He glanced at Sasuke and Sakura. Sakura's hair was damp and had lost its usual volume, and Sasuke's arms were littered with beads of moisture. Regardless of the humidity, the place had a certain charm to it that he would have stopped to appreciate under normal circumstances. There would be time for that later. Right now, he couldn't keep from shaking with excitement knowing that his next phase of training was on the horizon. Sasuke peered at him over Sakura's shoulder. Naruto, you'll mess up if you're too eager and lose concentration, he said with a calmness that surprised his brother. Where was the usual snark? The blonde hid his confusion behind a competitive glare. Whatever. I'm gonna get it on the first try, believe it. Sakura held out her hands, smiled nervously, and said, let's just try to do our best, okay? Her warm smile melted Naruto's heart, and he grew red in the face. Oh okay, Sakura. Actually, since you mentioned it, Sasuke, Genma added with a shrug, chances are you'll both mess up. No one gets it on their first try, or even their second. The Uchiha raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Kakashi raised an arm to signal the group to stop at a fork in their path, balancing on one crutch with surprising ease. We're splitting up here, he said. Follow me, Sakura. Yes, sensei. Sakura shuffled along behind Kakashi, hands clasped in front of her in a cute way. Naruto couldn't help but worry while he watched her go. Something told him Kakashi-sensei was going to be ruthless in his training methods again. Genma said, this way, Naruto. Sasuke. He shoved his hands in his pockets, taking the right path. Kakashi and Sakura were hidden by dense underbrush as they disappeared down the left one. Once he found a suitable open area, Genma changed course and walked onto the grass. Naruto and Sasuke joined him. Their shoes made an audible squeak with every step. The brown-haired Jonin tipped his head back, splayed his arms, and breathed in the fresh air. Both boys stood idly by, watching him smile to himself. Naruto scratched his face, struck by his teacher's words. Well, I guess I kinda did think that. Don't you have to protect Dad all the time? All of us Jonin, even those with three-man squads or special assignments like mine, get the occasional mission outside of the village. And I had a life before I worked under Minato, too, you know. Sasuke stepped over a thick tree root and let out an amused huff, earning a wrathful glare from Naruto. What are you laughing at, Sasuke? He demanded to know. You're so narrow-minded sometimes. It's just funny. We'll see who's narrow-minded when I learn this faster than you. Genma interrupted their banter with a cough. I hope you've both been honing your chakra control, because you're going to need those skills today. Ah, here it is. The Jonin pushed aside a branch in his way and exited on the other side of the thick growth of trees, revealing a glistening stream surrounded by bushes and wildlife. He led them toward the water and stepped into the shallow end. A deer drinking from the stream raised its head and bolted at the sight of the newcomers. All right then, Genma said. Let me show you the basics. Wow. Kakashi stared above him in awe. Sakura sat casually on the highest branch of a tree. This is fun, sensei. She called out, smiling down at him. What's this girl made of? He thought to himself. Her chakra control was astounding, especially for being fresh out of the academy. What she lacked in combat prowess, she apparently compensated for in other areas. All right, he said. Sakura, that's enough. She joined him on the ground and stood with her hands at her sides. Her nervous smile became a puzzled stare when he formed a hand sign. Sakura, since you're clearly proficient at this already, we're going to try something else. Quote, something else. Yes, I'm going to teach you about how to detect and counter genjutsu. Sakura gasped. Genjutsu? You mean how to break free from illusions? That's right. Listen to me closely, and do exactly as I say. All right, was up with Sasuke. He needed to stay focused on training, but it would be a lie to say the issue didn't nag at him. Genma laughed and put his hands on his. That was close. Why don't you both give it one more try? Quote, the boys groaned and sat up straighter, resting on the heels of their palms. The stream beneath them rushed along in a steady flow, further dampening their already soaked clothing. Sasuke stood up first. Then he helped Naruto to his feet. Neither of them were in the mood for any teasing right now. They backstepped out of the water side by side and turned to their teacher. I brought you here, Genma explained, because if you can handle a current, still water should be even easier to balance in. He flinched under the scrutiny of their serious stares. What? The water's not even that deep, and the current's pretty weak. Kakashi-sensei didn't say you had to make it more difficult for us on our first try, Naruto complained. I think I almost figured it out, Sasuke whispered to himself, having already forgotten about Genma's treachery. He looked down at his feet. The ratio. I'm so close. Good. The bodyguard said with a smile. Now keep at it. Sasuke returned to form without a word. Ah, wait for me. Naruto cried, assuming a neutral stance and making the appropriate hand sign to mold chakra. There was no way he'd let Sasuke get ahead of him. Chakra flowed through Naruto's body, from his chest outward to his fingertips and toes. He grunted aloud as he consciously redirected some chakra to pool in his feet. When he was satisfied with the amount built up, he focused on stemming the flow. He took measured breaths and balanced his output of chakra the way Genma had demonstrated. Then he took another step onto the water, peeking at Sasuke mid-step, who was in the middle of doing the same. Naruto winced in anticipation of losing his balance and falling in again. Seconds passed and Naruto blinked, staring down at his feet, which were safely positioned atop the water's surface. He grinned, shaking with excitement. I did it. Naruto raised his arms in celebration, then cried out as he fell onto the rocks in the bed of the stream yet again. He looked to Sasuke, who maintained a wobbly stance on the water. Darn it, Naruto said, pounding a fist against his leg. When the frustration passed, he turned to observe his brother's progress. I can't lose to Sasuke. Sasuke didn't look at him, much too concerned with staying balanced. Don't blame me. You're the one who wasn't paying attention, loser. He stumbled before Naruto could respond, made a big splash, and fell flat. Ha 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 ha. Naruto broke down into a fit of laughter. Now who's not paying attention, huh? He stopped laughing long enough to help Sasuke sit up, then resumed his mockery. Genma shook his head and smiled. Good work, you two. You learn pretty fast. Let's try it again. When I feel you have a good enough grasp on this, we'll go back. Sasuke nodded and returned to his starting place on the grass. Naruto clambered up the lip of the stream and stood beside him. The gear Sasuke donned before they left was in a pile nearby. The Uzumaki couldn't help but wonder why he was using that bow and arrow again all of a sudden. Even more bizarre was the attitude shift. Was this what he meant earlier by, "I'm trying something new from here on"? Naruto's musings were cut short when he noticed Sasuke stepping onto the water. "Starting without me again? Oh, no ya don't." For the next half hour, they continued to practice the technique. Naruto had less trouble maintaining his footing with each attempt. The same seemed to be true of his brother, who in time progressed to holding his bow at full draw while standing on the surface of the water. "Great progress, you two," Genma said. "We can go back after this, if you'd like." Quote. Naruto threw Sasuke a furtive glance from his own position atop the water. "Look at him, showing off like that." Sasuke noticed Naruto peeking and cocked his head in confusion. "What's up?" the Uchiha asked. "Why are you looking at me like I spit in your ramen?" Genma arched an eyebrow, making Naruto feel uneasy. "Someone's jealous." The blonde's simmering stare analyzed Sasuke to the core, but he relented when the raven-haired boy didn't look away or make a face. Naruto realized he really wasn't being made fun of or tricked. Sasuke was being straight with him the whole time. Here he was acting like a paranoid idiot, when all his brother was trying to do was train. He was the jerk here. "No, it's not," Naruto muttered. "My bad, Sasuke." Sasuke backstepped out of the stream. "Don't worry about it." Genma turned to leave. "You two done for now? Let's head back." Quote. "Actually," Sasuke said, raising a hand, "can we stay? Just let everyone know we'll teleport back to the house when we're done." Taking a moment to consider the request, Genma nodded. "Okay. Remember, focus on maintaining an even discharge of chakra. Also, leave enough in your tank so at least one of you can make the jump to us when you're done." Sasuke nodded. "Got it." Their instructor poofed out of view, his body flicker taking him far away in an instant. Naruto looked at his brother. Now it was just the two of them, alone. It was quiet, apart from gentle splashes in the stream and the sounds of animals and bugs. "Why'd you want to hang back?" he asked when the tension became too much for him. "And don't tell me it's to keep practicing water walking." Sasuke sighed. "I wanted to tell you something, Naruto." This was it, wasn't it? The answer he'd been dying to hear from Sasuke about why the hell he up and changed his attitude overnight. "What is it?" the Uzumaki asked, unable to keep the quivering out of his voice. Sasuke sat cross-legged on the ground, his bow across his lap. Naruto joined him without a word. "Naruto, I know the way I'm acting today probably seems like it's coming out of nowhere, but it's not. Not for me. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I just want to try things differently now." "You mentioned that before," Naruto said, his knees wobbling with anxiety as he spoke. "What are you talking about exactly?" Quote. "It's about where I disappear to every week. You used to ask about it all the time. Minato and Kushina always made excuses for me." It was true. Naruto had found his disappearing once or twice a week for an hour or more at a time to be odd, but after a while, he stopped asking since it seemed like a taboo subject for mom and dad. They got all cagey whenever he pushed the topic. Sasuke went on. "They did that because I asked them to. But I don't want to hide it anymore. At least not from you. You're an idiot sometimes, but I hope you didn't think I actually hated you or anything." Naruto froze, stunned by what was taking place right now. He had half a mind to pinch himself and wake up from this crazy dream. He let Sasuke continue, not knowing what to say. "Yeah, I expected that response. Well, I'm just gonna say it. For the past 5 years, I've been going to see Ino's dad, Mr. Inoichi, for help with trauma." Quote. "Trauma? Yeah, ever since what happened with my clan, and my brother, it's eaten away at me, you know. I never felt quite right. My head was always clouded by thoughts of him, and what happened. I didn't want to open up to people, or admit how I felt. Naruto tilted his head, squinting as he took in the information. Why not? It was easier. Easier than going off at the mouth about everything hurting me in my life. That's also why I didn't want anyone to know I was going to therapy. The Yamanaka clan's mind transfer was perfect for helping me work through my issues, but I didn't want to have to explain why I needed to go to him if people found out. It was just easier. Easier to hide my confusion, my anger, my sadness. But the problem is, and I have Mr. Inoichi to thank for helping me realize this, when I tried to bottle up those emotions, I was taking them out on the wrong people. Sometimes even on Minato, Kushina, or you. And I wanted to tell you I'm sorry for any time I crossed a line in our friendship. Sasuke gripped his bow tighter. There. That's it. I got it all out. He looked up with noticeable hesitance. Well, you gonna say something? Naruto rested his chin on open palms. He sat that way for a good 15 seconds, or maybe more. Sasuke had just laid a lot on him, so it was only fair that he allowed himself time to think it over. Cutting Naruto's thoughts short, his brother asked, Naruto, do you forgive me? Being in this situation, with Sasuke at the mercy of what he chose to say next, made Naruto feel funny inside. Not in a triumphant, excited kind of way either. He could tell how big this moment was, and how much weight his opinion held for Sasuke right now. Sasuke didn't need to say it for Naruto to know he cared about him too. His brother was vulnerable right now, and Naruto couldn't stand the pressure of what amounted to having the Uchiha's heart in the palm of his hand. Feigning an upbeat attitude, Naruto smiled and shook his head. Are you kidding me? Why would I be mad at you over something like that? The tightness in his chest didn't relent, but he refused to let it show by putting on his brightest smile. He slapped his brother on the shoulder, hoping this would be enough to reassure Sasuke. The pools of black that were the latter's eyes stayed trained on Naruto, but something about them was different now. They looked less bold than usual. Less sure. Well, that's good, Sasuke said, letting out a sigh. He rubbed his bow with an absent stare. Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't said enough. He turned his attention to the uncomfortable feeling in the pit of his stomach, failing to hold back a slight squirm that, thankfully, went unnoticed by the preoccupied archer. Seriously, Sasuke, you don't need to be all worried about stuff like that with me. No lines have been crossed or anything like that. Well, you seemed upset about the. Sasuke eyed the stream, not finishing his sentence. The blonde blew a raspberry. Don't worry about that. I just. Naruto faltered, reaching for the right words. Well, yeah, seeing you getting the hang of water walking a little faster than I did stung a little. But it's not something for you to feel bad about. I mean, you know I wanna prove myself worthy of being 5th Hokage. So if I'm not able to master things as simple as this, then the less of a chance that you'll measure up to him when you take over. Yeah, Naruto splayed his arms. Yeah, that, you get it. Sorry for being so difficult, okay. Really. Pleased that he'd gotten what he needed to say out, he waited on a response with an unblinking stare. I'm glad we understand each other, Sasuke said with a soft smile. You know, you may be an idiot, but you have your moments, Naruto. Quote. Rather than arguing again, Naruto only laughed. He'd been worried that he might lose Sasuke if he said the wrong thing just now. Childish though it was, at least his brother's teasing meant the real Sasuke was still in there. However much he might have changed, all that mattered was keeping their brotherly bond alive. Sasuke stood up, ignoring Naruto's fit of laughter. He walked a few paces away before turning back. Hey, before we head back, would you mind helping me test something out? Quote. Sure. Naruto stared open-mouthed, curious to see where this was going. Sasuke knocked an arrow on his bow and held it at the ready, pulling back to almost full draw. I'm going to need your clones for this. Let's start with one. Naruto frowned, reluctantly forming the hand sign to summon a shadow clone. Target practice had been furthest from what he expected. Naruto groaned. Just make sure you don't hit the real me. Quote. Naruto and Sasuke reappeared in the guest room of Tezuna's household. Both were out of breath, their clothes damp and speckled with dirt and grass. The boys hurried to change, eager to feel dry again. We're back, Naruto shouted as he pulled his shirt over his head. Several voices from another room muddled together, their responses lost in the process. Guess we know where everyone is, Sasuke said. In the next few minutes, they entered the main room in a dry, fresh set of clothes. However, their drooping gaits earned them a couple of raised eyebrows. Genma, Tezuna, and Tsunami were in the middle of a conversation, but paused when they entered. Inari waved to them as he carried a hooked fish into another room. There's my two overachievers, Genma announced with a wink. Are you boys alright? Tsunami asked. Tezuna crossed his arms. Hurt yourselves out there. Quote. Nah, Naruto said, plodding into the room. I just need to eat and recharge. He threw Sasuke a cold stare. Someone had the bright idea of making me create tons of clones and exhaust my chakra. Not to mention I still feel like I've been stabbed a few dozen times in a row. He nursed a spot on his back where the ghosts of past pains echoed the most. Sorry, Sasuke muttered, but thanks again for helping out. With what? Genma cut in, his eyes lighting up with curiosity. An idea for a technique I wanted to test out, Sasuke explained. It's not perfected yet, but I think I'm onto something. Good, Kakashi said with a clap of his hands as he entered from another doorway, still balancing on crutches. Sakura walked close behind him, dragging her feet. Because you'll need that creativity for the plan I've come up with, Sasuke. Plan. Naruto raised his head, interest piqued. Plan for what? Huh. He noticed Sakura's slumped posture and gasped. Wait. Sakura. What happened? Are you okay? She's fine, Naruto, Kakashi reassured, waving off his concern. We just did some intense training is all. Quote. Naruto shuddered. He didn't want to know what Kakashi considered intense training, if the bell test was the Jonin's idea of a normal training exercise. Sensei. Sakura groaned, you're so cruel. She crumpled to the floor, arms flat behind her and knees curled against her chest. The position looked insanely uncomfortable, but it was clear she had little energy for anything else. Poor Sakura, Naruto whispered. What did he do to you? No kidding, Sasuke seconded. Once everyone's eaten and rested for a bit, Kakashi said, casting a remorseful glance toward Sakura. I'll go over our strategy. Sharing a glance with Naruto, Sasuke tilted his head. Strategy. That's right. After another day or two of training, we're taking the fight straight to Gato. The warmth of Kakashi's encouraging smile could be felt even through the fabric of his mask. In that instant, as wild as it was, Naruto felt like whatever crazy plan their sensei had was going to work. Zabuza sat upright in bed, wincing as Haku finished looping a bandage around his leg for the last time, then pulled until it was snug. His caretaker looked up at him with eyes that were a deep, cedar brown. There, Haku said. I've replaced all of your bandages, Zabuza. Haku's kind smile betrayed the efficient killing machine hidden beneath the surface. Zabuza never quite got used to this child's dual nature, no matter how much time they spent together. He turned the once innocent boy into a tool for his own benefit, and yet somehow, he still looked at him with love and trust instead of the resentment he deserved. Shaking himself out of his thoughts, Zabuza retracted his outstretched leg with a grunt. Thanks, Haku. My pleasure. Haku's long black hair concealed his face as he bowed. He cleared the bed of all remaining medical supplies and gauze, then returned to his injured Ali's side. Having tucked himself back under the covers, Zabuza stared at the ceiling, mulling over recent events. Haku said nothing for a long while, but raised his head when a noise behind him forecasted someone entering the room. Sure enough, the door eased open. Zabuza dangled a hand off of the side of the bed. He brushed his fingers against the hilt of his large blade, which never left his side, even at times like these. Both mist assassins relaxed when the short, dark spectacled man who hired them stepped through the door. Way, followed by two of his guardian swordsmen. The chilling atmosphere that entered with them alerted Zabuza that something was about to happen here. He wasn't worried as much for himself or Haku as for Gato. Still, he wanted to get paid, and dead businessmen couldn't make good on their payments. So he found himself with an irritating dilemma here. The demon of the hidden mist gritted his teeth, considering how to proceed as Gato opened his mouth to spout still more self-important drivel. On the bright side, him talking too much would give Zabuza more time to think. No payments worth all this, he thought with a sigh. A day and a half of rest had passed in the blink of an eye. Zabuza lifted his heavy blade and rested its dull edge on the back of his neck, relieved that his body was responding well despite his injuries. He shared a glance with Haku, who stood at the opposite end of the room, mask donned in preparation for battle. Dozens of additional guards that Gato hired when Zabuza warned him of their little problem, took up positions around the room, watching the discard D-tip of the executioner's blade for any sudden movements. Of course, their ragtag group of guards was short a few men. Where else was Zabuza supposed to have found enough blood to regenerate his shattered sword on such short notice? He broke off the end of the blade the moment he noticed Kakashi's flying thunder god marking. Haku's ice release came in handy, allowing him to easily weaken the metal. Now, all they could do was wait and watch. Sooner or later, the copy ninja and his brats would show up, expecting to catch them all by surprise. Cursing under his breath, Zabuza thought once again about how this job was becoming more trouble than it was worth. Damn that Gato. He made a mental note to demand an increase in pay from the bastard when this was all over. The new terms would be tough to argue with after he and Haku eliminated Kakashi's squad and delivered the bridge builder's head to Gato on a platter. Cutting his ruminations short, the uninvited guests arrived in the center of the room, standing in formation around the jagged piece of metal Zabuza dug into the floor. The ex-mist ninja let off a hoarse, maniacal laugh, drawing the leaf ninja's attention. Like fish to a net, he growled, lunging at them with his sword positioned to take their heads clean off. Here I come, Kakashi of the Sharingan. Naruto landed in a wide stance, taking note of how many enemies were in the room. Even without learning Dad's special sensory technique yet, he had no trouble with a group packed this close together. 20. Kakashi-sensei whipped out a kunai, his Sharingan already exposed. His stance, his demeanor, even his aura was different. He gave off such dangerous energy without saying a word. Sasuke drew his bow and pointed it at the nearest thug. Sakura made a hand sign and closed her eyes with an unsteady breath, trusting her team to hold off any enemies while she did her part. Now, cried Kakashi. He, Naruto, and Sasuke sprang into action. Zabuza came dashing toward them like a madman, shouting as killing intent oozed from him unabated. Kakashi swept Zabuza's legs, interrupting his momentum and forcing him to roll sideways to avoid a faceplant. Not missing a beat, the silver-haired Jonin struck three of Gato's guards with a single stroke of his kunai. They dropped their weapons, blood spurting from their deep wounds. In the same instant, Naruto summoned a few clones. They fanned out, keeping the rest of the enemies at bay. Sasuke focused his breathing and used his Sharingan to pin anyone who approached Sakura to the wall with an arrow. It wouldn't distract them for long, but she didn't need long for their plan to work. Watching everyone take enemies out one by one in only the first few seconds since their arrival took Naruto's breath away. Things were going off without a hitch. Kakashi-sensei really was an awesome ninja. Thinking back to the strategy meeting a couple of days ago, Naruto swelled with excitement. Team 7 gathered together after lunch, rejuvenated from their first day of training and ready to discuss their plan of attack. Kakashi sat cross-legged in front of his captivated audience, ringed by the equally engaged bridge builder and his family. Genma leaned against a wall near Kakashi, chewing on his senbon as usual. So, Naruto said, how are we gonna kick their butts, sensei? Quote. Kakashi held up a finger. Carefully, Naruto. But yes, you're right that if this goes as planned, butts will be kicked, and they won't be ours. Pleased to hear this, Naruto pounded his fists against his knees with a giddy smile. You said we were taking the fight straight to them, didn't you? Sakura asked, blinking as she stared up at Kakashi. If I may ask, how, sensei? Kakashi leaned forward. I'm glad you asked. He took a breath before going into the deep explanation. Naruto, Sasuke, I know the Flying Thunder God as well. I'm not nearly as familiar with it as Minato sensei, or the two of you either, really. I'd say from what I've seen, I can mold the chakra to perform a jump a little faster than you can, but I use too much. Quote, what? Really? Naruto's mouth hung open. Wow. Sensei, what can't you do? Use the technique several times in a row, for starters. I mean, sure, if I were to rely on only jumping to seals for an entire fight, it wouldn't be too taxing, but I would be limited to using mainly taijutsu because the ability demands so much of my chakra. I wouldn't be able to rely on the hundreds of ninjutsu I've copied in a scenario like that. Sasuke said after some thought. Makes sense. How does you knowing the Flying Thunder God factor into this, though? Quote, oh, I get it. Sakura piped up. You tagged Zabuza with the marking, didn't you, sensei? Very sharp. Sakura. Kakashi praised. She flashed a shy smile. Exactly. Rather, I tagged the end of Zabuza's blade. He can't remove it, because once applied, a Flying Thunder God mark never goes away. Odds are he won't notice until the next time that he cleans or sharpens it. But what if he does? Sasuke was quick to interject. But if he does, then in a way, that's even better for us. Why's that, you ask? Because then we know exactly what they're planning, too. Naruto shouted, a wide grin on his face. Believe it. Right, Kakashi said. If they've figured out I have a way to reach them, then they'll be waiting to strike when we show up. If not, that means we'll catch them unawares and we can get to Gato even easier. Either situation works in our favor. Quote, what'll we do after we get him? Naruto asked. Gato. I mean, the unspoken question on everyone's minds hung in the still air. Kakashi eyed Inari. The boy was trembling with anticipation. Reading the room, Tsunami led him away, shooting a concerned glance over her shoulder before they disappeared from sight. Gato will be restrained and his operations here will be shut down. Our primary objective is keeping Tazuna safe, so this course of action should ensure we complete our mission, and that the bridge is finished on schedule. If capturing Gato isn't possible, then we'll have to kill him, Sakura said in a shaky voice. Kakashi nodded. Yes, but it shouldn't come to that. Launching a preemptive strike gives us the edge. We're forcing Gato and his hired thugs, as well as Zabuza and the ice user working with him, to play by our rules, not theirs. His gaze fell on Sakura, pulling all eyes in the room toward her like a beacon. Which brings me to the most important role in this plan. That honor, Kakashi pointed at the nervous Kunoichi. Falls to you, Sakura. She gulped. Me. Naruto smirked over his shoulder, watching Sakura in action. She concentrated her chakra, sending an invisible wave of it outward. She'd learned so much from her short time training with Kakashi-sensei, and he couldn't wait to see her grow even further. Snapping back into focus, Naruto parried a blow from one of the gang members and dove back into the fray of combat, using Sakura's impending diversion to his advantage. That's right, Kakashi said in response to a confused Sakura. You see, everyone, Sakura and I have been going over the basics of casting and countering genjutsu. Quote, wow, Naruto said. You can do that already, Sakura. Sakura laughed and waved him off. Well, I'm not all that good yet, but Kakashi-sensei said I have talent for it. She turned to the Jonin whose eyes were still on her. Sensei, why are you trusting me with this? Well, he said, it's because genjutsu will come in handy for this kind of battle. We'll be surrounded by foes, so disrupting their focus, even for the briefest moment, means a higher chance of victory. Naruto, Sasuke, and I will make sure no one touches you while you cast the genjutsu. Odds are Zabuza and his ice user friend will break the genjutsu in no time, but they'll still have to expend chakra releasing the technique. Anyone on Gato's payroll without an activated chakra network will effectively be out of the picture, more than evening our odds. I see. But, Sakura's gaze drifted toward Genma, who had yet to say a word. But why not have someone like Genma-sensei do it? Oh, me. Genma looked up at her and smiled, gnawing at the senbon sticking out of his mouth. Actually, I'm leaving tomorrow. You are? Naruto blurted out. But why so soon? Genma shrugged. Naruto, my mission directive was to make sure you and Sasuke were safe on your way to Tazuna's house, and I've done that. So I'm going to help with training again tomorrow morning, but then I'll be going back. Besides, he looked at Sakura again, genjutsu isn't my forte anyway. Don't worry, though, if Kakashi says you've got this, then I know you'll do great. Thank you, sir. Sakura said, bowing as her cheeks turned red due to all of the attention on her. The genjutsu took hold almost immediately, slowing or stopping the motion of everyone but Zabuza on the enemy side. Naruto and Sasuke took out the thugs with ease. Meanwhile, Kakashi charged Zabuza, who was about to cleave Sakura in two, and drove him toward the nearest window. They crashed through the glass and fell out of sight, leaving the three genin alone in Gato's hideout. Well, Sasuke said, that went surprisingly well. That's for sure, Sakura agreed, sighing as she released the genjutsu and her posture slackened. Phew. Naruto looked around at the room full of unconscious enemies. Wow. Sakura, Kakashi-sensei wasn't kidding. You do have a knack for this stuff. She went red in the face and smiled. Thanks, Naruto. Quote. Wait. Sasuke scanned the room. Where's the ice user? Right here, said a familiar voice. The three genin looked up and gasped. There the masked ice user was, perched upside down on the ceiling. The adversary formed a series of hand signs at an impossible speed. Sasuke fired an arrow out of the window without looking and darted in Naruto and Sakura's direction, pulling them with him as he tried to avoid the incoming attack. I won't let you escape, warned the calm voice of the enemy ninja. A chill overcame the room, but Sasuke didn't stop. Every second counted, Naruto realized. He summoned a large amount of chakra, not bothering with how refined his technique was, and shouted at the top of his lungs. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. Kakashi slammed Zabuza against the grass outside of Gato's headquarters, pressing the cold metal of a kunai against the man's open palm, which guarded an otherwise exposed neck. A series of massive trees like the one the thugs' hideout was anchored to towered over them, blotting out almost all sunlight. Kakashi needed to hurry and finish things up here so he could go back and help his students. Grunting, he applied pressure to Zabuza's sword-wielding arm with his knee. The rogue ninja's wrist writhed with pain and after a short struggle, he loosened his grip. They continued to grapple with the kunai that was dangerously close to his throat. It's over, Zabuza, Kakashi seethed. We beat you. There's nowhere to run. Zabuza bit through the bandages around his mouth and laughed despite the blood staining his sharp teeth. That's what you think. His ominous laugh blended together with a noise from above. The faint rumbling rose in volume until Kakashi couldn't help but look up to find its source. An explosion of gigantic ice spikes burst from the windows of the conical-shaped hideout. The building buckled under the weight of the jutsu. One of its support beams cracked from the pressure. No, everyone. Kakashi rolled away from the building as chunks of the upper floor's wall plummeted to the ground, missing him by an inch. Zabuza took the opportunity to retrieve his sword, then rushed Kakashi. I have to get to the others. Kakashi evaded wide sword swings on autopilot, multitasking and trying to concoct a plan to end this madness. If he didn't stop Zabuza soon, things were going to get even more ugly. 13 Let them have fish cake, and eat it, too. A biting chill filled the air inside Gato's decimated headquarters. Haku weaved his way between nearly 24 bodies and wreckage strewn about in the wake of the battle. His jutsu left behind residue in the form of large, misshapen lumps of ice. If not for the ugly brawl that surrounded this moment, he mused, they might have passed for sculptures. Encased within one of these icy marvels were 3 bodies, 2 teenage males and 1 teenage girl. Haku stopped in front of the imprisoned enemy ninja whom he'd trapped in his ice release, examining them with a blank expression. He could feel warmth reaching his eyes, but shook it off to remain focused on the mission. There was no time for emotional lapses. Zabuza needed his help. Gato would be safe upstairs, so long as he had followed instructions and stayed put in his hiding spot. Haku's job was simple: eliminate the hidden leaf foes. The fact they were children with dreams of their own made no difference. Haku was Zabuza's weapon, a tool meant only for the rogue ninja's use, even if it meant killing his own emotions. It's a shame we must cross paths this way, he said, taking a moment to look at the faces of each of the imab. I Liz Shinobi. Please forgive me, but this is the fate of a ninja. To watch one's comrades die in front of them, and even to kill others, or their comrades, when the need arises. Haku sucked in a breath and readied a fusenbon between his knuckles. Goodbye. Tearing across the frosty structure with a single swipe of his claw, Haku rended the mass of ice into 3 distinct pieces, destroying it along with the bodies of the children inside. The kimono-clad assassin couldn't believe his eyes when the frozen corpses turned to smoke. Team 7's 3 genin tumbled downhill and came to a stop in a patch of wet grass. Sakura was first to rise, followed by Naruto and Sasuke. They wiped what dirt and grime they could from their clothes inside. Sakura, in particular, seemed mortified by the condition her hair was in. She whined audibly, then took off an open-toed shoe and checked underneath one of her feet. Ugh, she complained, mud. The kunoichi dutifully scraped the mud away from the sole of her sandal as best she could with the EDG. Of a kunai. Ouch, Naruto grumbled, rolling his shoulder. I know the injuries aren't really there, but they sure feel like it. His ice spikes nearly got us, even with all the clones I made. I know, Sasuke said. Thanks, Naruto. You bought us enough time to jump here. Now what? Sakura asked as she slipped her shoe back on. Naruto threw a fist in the air. Now we go support Kakashi-sensei. And what about Gato? She added, glancing back in the direction of the crime lord's hideout. The Uzumaki grinned. It's taken care of, Sakura. No sweat. Believe it. Gato burst from the inside of a wardrobe and breathed a comforting gulp of fresh air. He took a moment to look around, making sure the coast was clear before sauntering out of the room where Zabuza's brat left him. No one was on this floor besides him, so he could afford to take his time making an exit. He checked a couple of his hiding places, pleased to find both stashes of Ryo left untouched. In a hurry to stuff the money into his pockets, Gato froze when he heard footsteps approaching from below. He scrambled to find another spot to hide in, running as fast as his tiny frame would allow. The businessman collided with something firm, falling onto his side with an unceremonious thud. He stood up, coming face to face with a young blonde boy in an orange jumpsuit. There you are, said the kid. Honestly, I thought you'd be taller. He was one of the Leaf Shinobi, Gato realized upon glancing at his headband. The panicked crime lord's sloppy attempt at an escape was foiled when an identical copy of his pursuer stepped out from around a corner and tripped him. Oh, no ya don't. The boy's twin shouted. You're comin' with me, old man. I'll deliver the message, said the original. His copy nodded, then reached for Gato. The twin slipped his arms underneath Gato's shoulders and held him captive while the first boy made a hand sign, then disappeared. Naruto stood up straight, stiff with shock as a sudden rush of knowledge came over him. His comrades looked toward him in confusion. Naruto, what is it? Sakura asked. Holding up a finger, Naruto grinned and said, just wait for it. A second later, his clone dropped a dejected Gato onto the grass in front of him. Great job, me, said the real Naruto. Thanks, me, said the clone. Sasuke and Sakura's synchronized sighs went unheeded by their prideful teammate. Retrieving a coil of rope from his backpack, Sasuke said, "Let's tie him up." Amidst a battlefield submerged in fog, Kakashi slammed his palms against the dirt, conjuring an earthen brick wall with 4 dog heads at its center. The wall rose from the ground in front of him just in time to defend against an enraged sword swing from Zabuza. When his attack met resistance, the rogue ninja cried out and applied pressure. In no time, his sword cleaved through the dense wall, blasting it apart and raining dirt like hail across the landscape. When he stopped to observe the aftermath, Kakashi was nowhere to be seen. Reacting with inhuman speed, Zabuza sidestepped an attempted lightning blade, leaving Kakashi in a compromising position. Zabuza had positioned his weapon upside down so that the Leaf Jonin's arm was sticking straight through a hole near the sharp end of the blade. Making matters worse, the Mist Ninja had a firm grip on his wrist to prevent him from backing away. "That's right," said a voice that echoed through the thick fog. Zabuza tried to yank his blade free, but it was jammed too deep into the forest floor and fought against removal. Another strained tug revealed that something wasn't right. The sword was being held in place somehow. Abandoning it altogether, Zabuza backflipped and scoured his surroundings for any sign of danger. Seeing nothing, he tensed up and brought his hands together to perform a jutsu. Just then, a gloved hand gripped his ankle like a vice. Kakashi pulled him below ground before he could react. Nothing but his head remained above the surface, and he was unable to move. Due to the disruption in his chakra output, the mist began to clear up. An unharmed Kakashi strode onto the scene, the executioner's blade in hand. "That was Earth style. Headhunter Jutsu," he announced in a mockingly cheerful tone. "Looks like I got you." "Damn it," Zabuza said, struggling against his predicament to no avail. "It's true that you were a tough opponent, but..." A rolling wave of ice spikes erupted from below, creating a frozen barrier between the two men. Having dodged just in time, Kakashi turned to face the ice release user. The mask Naruto and Sasuke spoke of a couple of days ago was intact again. A noticeable crack in its center indicated it was recently mended. "Haku!" Zabuza yelled, "Free me. Now." "Of course, Zabuza," said the ice user. Kakashi dashed toward the new foe without a word. His Sharingan alerted him to a rise in the enemy's chakra output, enabling him to react in time when an ice mirror appeared. He threw a kunai, preventing their escape through the mirror, then wielded Zabuza's sword with a mighty, two-handed swing. Kakashi incorporated a current of lightning chakra prior to impact, shattering the mirror. His foe ducked under the attack and jabbed a Senbon at his throat. The two locked eyes, and the masked ninja lost concentration, missing his strike and falling off balance. Kakashi kicked him across the grass and then readied himself for a finishing blow, hoping to render the child incapable of fighting rather than having to kill him. Although, he had a feeling the odds of that were slim at best. "If I hadn't used genjutsu, I'd be dead now," Kakashi thought to himself, suppressing a shudder. This child was no pushover, that was for sure. Turns out Naruto and Sasuke weren't exaggerating at all. The ice user formed hand signs at an impressive speed, almost too fast for Kakashi's Sharingan to rack. The Jonin took a stance, anticipating some kind of diversion coming his way. Sure enough, a series of ice shards created using the moisture in the air came flying at him. He spun Zabuza's sword in a windmill motion, destroying the projectiles. Meanwhile, an unseen shadow clone lurked near his captured foe. Sure enough, the ice user sped past him, going straight for Zabuza, but was intercepted by the clone lying in wait. They remained at a standstill, one Kakashi on either side of the enemy. The ice user proceeded to cast yet another jutsu, and a dome of consecutive ice mirrors encircled the combatants. Zabuza's exposed head watched from afar. "Don't hold back, boy," he commanded. "Understood." Quote, "Stop right there," shouted Naruto from somewhere above the battleground. All heads turned to see him standing with his arms crossed on the branch of a tall tree. Sasuke was on the branch next to his, and at the highest branch of the tree, Sakura fastened a rope that dangled a fearful Gato in midair. Haku moved to strike, but Sakura wagged a finger. Don't even think about it, she warned. She reached down and opened one of the flaps of Gato's jacket, revealing it was lined with paper bombs. One wrong move and we set them off, Sasuke said with a stern glare. You brats wouldn't dare, Zabuza snarled. Sakura made a hand sign. Wanna bet? A long, uncomfortable standoff ended with Zabuza cursing to himself before saying, stand down, Haku. Quote. But Zabuza, stand down. Quote. Very well. The boy dismantled his ice mirror technique, then knelt and allowed Kakashi to tie his wrists together and remove his mask. The clone of Kakashi knocked Zabuza out, then unearthed and subdued him as well. Later, Team 7 stood in front of a defeated Zabuza, Haku, and the rest of Gato's gang of hired thugs. The subdued enemies sat up and struggled against their bonds, still somewhat disoriented. Kakashi looked on in silent appreciation at the results of his team's ambush. Not bad, you guys, he said, much to the delight of Sakura and Naruto. Even Sasuke cracked a smile. Now there's just one thing left to do. He walked over to Gato, lifting the pint-sized man and depositing him in front of Zabuza and Haku. Kakashi looked into Gato's eyes with his Sharingan exposed and gave explicit instructions. Tell us once again what you were planning in relation to your plot against Tazuna, the bridge builder. Gato seized for a moment, overwhelmed by the effect of the Sharingan's genjutsu, then rattled off a rise of admissions of his secret plans. When he reached the part of interest to Haku and Zabuza, they shared a glance. And when I was done with those two lowlifes, I was going to either have the rest of my men take them out, or report them to the Mizukage so I wouldn't have to hold up my end of our deal. They weren't worth the financial loss. Kakashi covered his Sharingan eye again and looked to Zabuza and Haku. Well, you heard it from the man himself. All of the hired men in attendance broke out into an uproar, but they cowered when Zabuza roared at them to shut up. He exuded a chilling bloodlust befitting of the demon of the hidden mist, begging the crowd to challenge him. Softening his expression at last, he returned to the topic at hand. I have no personal quarrel with you Leaf Ninja. Once Haku and I receive our cut as promised, we'll be on our way. Kakashi patted Gato on the head, a smile crinkling the fabric of his mask. All right, well in that case, we'll call a truce from here on out. Any objections? He surveyed the thugs, who all remained silent or grumbled obscenities under their breaths. Gato's protests fell on deaf ears. Great. The Jonin gestured toward his students, drawing them closer. Untie everyone, but make sure their weapons are out of reach, just to be safe. Then we'll head back. He nodded toward Zabuza, mutual understanding passing between the two elite ninja. Kakashi's gaze then fell on Haku. You seem like a kind and very talented boy. I'm sure you'll become a splendid shinobi someday. Who knows? Maybe next time we meet, it won't have to be as enemies. Haku's uncertain gaze shifted from one man to the other. Perhaps so. Kakashi's voice dropped to a somber tone. Also, I know about what happened to your clan. It's easy to tell you've probably had a tough childhood, but I'm glad you were able to survive, and that you're still using your ice release instead of having to hide your abilities. I'm sure you'll find your place in the world. Swallowing hard, Haku nodded and then smiled toward Zabuza, who looked at the ground in response. I already have. Oh, here you go, you guys. Naruto said with a broad smile. He walked over to Haku and Zabuza and dropped two pocket-sized bags at their feet. Gato whined as he watched this, but said nothing. The blonde boy stared back at him with a snort of disapproval. Zabuza's forehead creased as he examined the bags. What are these, kid? Just some money Gato had lying around. I caught him trying to run away with it earlier, so I took it when we tied him up. Does this cover what he was gonna pay you? Naruto opened the bags and let the mist duo peek inside. Their eyes widened and they looked up at him. Haku nodded. It's far more than enough. Veins bulged in Zabuza's face as his gaze snapped toward the businessman who he now knew was holding out on him. His body quaked with rage, but he quelled his temper before responding to the question. Yeah, he seethed. This'll do. In a matter of minutes, everyone was freed from their bindings. The groups parted ways on amicable terms. Gato's men busied themselves with ransacking his hideout until they found sufficient payment in the form of either Ryo or his valuables. Team 7 returned to Tazuna's house after exchanging a civil goodbye with Zabuza and Haku. Once there, everyone nursed their wounds, which were minor for the most part, and took a moment to rest. Wow, Sensei, Naruto said, falling onto his sleeping mat with his arms and legs splayed. You really did a number on Zabuza and Haku before we made it back, didn't you? Quote. Kakashi slumped against a wall, staring out of the window. He was once again using the crutches Tazuna provided. I'd say it's the other way around. I can barely stand now after having to use my Sharingan so much. I'll probably be out of commission for about a week, but at least the worst of the mission is behind us. A week? Naruto sputtered. He rolled onto his side and glanced across the room to make sure he heard right. Yeah, I was lucky to even be able to fight again so soon. That first encounter was nothing compared to how much chakra I was forced to expend earlier today. If you kids hadn't shown up when you did, I don't know if I could have outlasted those two. Quote. Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura exchanged worried looks. What if Gato breaks his word? Sasuke said, speaking for the collective. Yeah, Sakura chimed in. How do we know he won't send more ninja after Mr. Tazuna? The first time I used genjutsu on him, I embedded another command that will prevent him from breaking his promise. Besides, I think the little scare you three gave him by hanging him from that tree was already enough to guarantee his compliance. Kakashi chuckled, nearly falling over. Careful, Tsunami said as she walked into the room. Are you alright, Kakashi? I'll manage, ma'am, the Jonin said with a polite smile. Thanks. I'm going to get back in bed for a while, if you all don't mind. He took his time hobbling across the room and lowered himself onto his sleeping mat. 3 days later, Sakura strolled through a rundown strip that served as the local market. She gaped in awe at the wretched conditions of the shopfronts, houses, and attire of the disheveled patrons walking the streets. Someone shouted, "Thief!" and a child scurried past with his spoils in hand. Several individuals held signs displaying a variety of messages with one core theme, a desire for work. Not everyone seemed beaten down or was dressed in rags, but enough of the population looked desolate that she couldn't help feeling a pang in her heart. 2 children in tattered clothes slept side by side on the street, so still they almost blended in with their surroundings. Apart from Sakura, no one so much as glanced their way, driving home how common sights like these were. Her parents would never have let her leave the house without eating something, but it became clear in an instant that many of the people she and Tazuna passed were lucky to find scraps of food, if anything. Was this truly how citizens in this part of the world lived? According to Tazuna, they were headed into town because he needed to pick up ingredients for dinner. One look at the weathered and decaying buildings on either side of them made Sakura wonder if any produce worth buying could be found in a place like this. Suppressing a shudder, she followed him into one of the storefronts. A warm welcome from the shopkeeper did little to soften the blow dealt by what she saw in front of her. Barren shelves lined the walls, and what little there was to choose from was far from what Sakura would have considered fresh food. There's hardly anything here. She stepped out of the way of a man entering the store and tapped Tazuna on the arm. This is what you meant before, isn't it? She whispered. About why you need to finish the bridge. Quote. The crestfallen expression on his face told her everything she needed to know. He nodded before returning to the task of finding what salvageable items he could from the meager pickings available. Sakura refocused on surveilling the area. No matter how depressing the state of things here was, she wasn't here to sightsee. Her job was to keep Tazuna safe. Once outside, They made their way toward the edge of town on their way back to Tazuna's house. A hand grasped at Sakura's kimono. She whirled on the stranger in a fury, unsure if they were an enemy of the bridge builders, or just some pervert on the street targeting her. Either way, she was ready to give them a piece of her min. She stopped in her tracks at the sight of a small child wearing dirt-speckled clothes. The fair-skinned girl looked up at her with kind, cerulean eyes. They shimmered in the afternoon sun, full of not malice, but instead, a spark of hope. The kid flitted her gaze toward the pocket where Sakura stashed some candy she bought at one of the stores, then held out both palms and smiled. "May I please have some?" she asked with a happiness that outshone her appearance. Somehow, her purity and innocence remained unblemished by life's hard. Sakura frowned, doing her best not to cry as she fished around for some of the candies. "Oh, here," she said in a soft voice, depositing the treats into the girl's calloused hands with what she hoped was a welcoming smile. The girl's face lit up even brighter. "Yay!" she cried. "Thank you." Sakura nodded in response. She couldn't help but tear up as she watched the child scamper off, clutching her prized gifts close to her chest. The pink-haired kunoichi took comfort in knowing she'd done some good today. However, this place was still in dire need of assistance. Tazuna had been right all along. The bridge needed to be built, or else there was no hope for this land. Sakura sucked in a breath and locked eyes with the bridge builder, whose hardened exterior and bleak outlook now made so much sense. "Let's go home, Mr. Tazuna." He gave her a grim nod and they set off again, their hearts heavy. Naruto yawned, lacing his fingers together above his head for a good stretch. Sasuke listened with an expressionless gaze, nodding every so often as Sakura relayed her experience the previous day. The three genin stood off to the side atop the bridge where Tazuna and his fellow construction workers were laboring in relative silence, absorbed in their tasks. "I'm telling you, it's really bad here," she said. "I didn't realize just how hard the people here had it until I saw for myself." "Sounds pretty rough," Naruto admitted as he finished his stretch. "But you know, once this bridge is done, everything should start to change." "Right." Sasuke shrugged. "It won't fix everything overnight, but it's a start. We could buy everyone bowls of Ichiraku ramen and teleport it here," Naruto suggested, excitement coloring his expression. "Then they won't have to be hungry." "That's something." Sakura sighed. "Naruto, that's a sweet gesture, but you can't solve every problem in the world with ramen." Quote. The blonde's face contorted in bewilderment. "Says who?" Tazuna grunted and fell to one knee, almost dropping his end of a beam he and another worker were carrying across the bridge. Naruto gasped, forming the hand sign for the shadow clone jutsu. Several Narutos poofed into being and spread out, helping Tazuna and everyone else with their tasks. The original Naruto smiled back at his comrades. "For now, we can at least do something here. Right?" Quote. Sakura put a hand to her chest, her heart warmed by Naruto's optimism. "Yeah, right." She, Naruto, and Sasuke split up and resumed patrolling the area while Naruto's clones helped speed along the bridge building process. The abundance of work kept the men and the clones occupied, causing hours to fly by in what felt like an instant. An air of positivity and progress was in the air, in large part due to Naruto's loud outbursts and insistence on outdoing the other workers. Exhaustion gave way to a sense of duty and infectious competitive spirit. Sakura and Sasuke shook their heads and chuckled upon seeing that he had inspired others yet again with his ridiculous determination and childlike earnestness. When the sun was still high in the sky, a group of armed individuals standing at the finished end of the bridge petrified everyone with fear. The newcomers brandished a variety of weapons. Team 7 whipped out their ninja tools, prepared for a battle to protect Tazuna. "Everyone, stay behind us," Naruto ordered, casting a glare in the direction of their foes. Sakura and Sasuke instinctively fell into formation, surrounding Tazuna alongside a couple of Naruto clones. The two frontmost members of the crowd at the end of the bridge raised their arms, their weapons holstered to appear non-threatening to the crew. Seeing this, Tazuna sighed. The tallest of the two spoke first. "We aren't here to make trouble," Zabuza bellowed. "Not anymore, at least." Haku eyed Zabuza for confirmation before taking his turn to speak. He no longer wore a mask. His soft, almost feminine features were on full display. The boy's disarmingly striking and kind brown eyes drew attention to him with little effort. "We've decided to help." The crowd parted, making room for new faces to come forward. A small boy and his mother stepped into view, shocking Team 7 and the construction crew in equal measure. "Inari, Ms. Tsunami," Naruto said, almost dropping his kunai from surprise. Tsunami only smiled, while Inari toted a crossbow, a grin on his face. "We're all working together now. If anyone tries to stop this bridge from being built, they'll have to go through all of us." Quote. Sasuke and Inari shared a knowing glance, and the Uchiha nodded in acceptance of the boy's newfound purpose. His words had reached the brat after all, it seemed. He breathed a sigh of relief, certain that Minato, Kushina, and Inoichi would be proud if they could be here to see this. Naruto scanned the faces in the crowd, and was left stunned by who he saw. Not only were some of the villagers here, wielding common household items like rakes, shovels and pitchforks, but even Gato's former thugs were present. Everyone stood in a casual manner, supporting the claim that they were presenting a united front. "Still, how do we know we can trust you?" Sakura countered, gripping her kunai tighter. Zabuza hung his head. "You don't. If you don't trust us," the mist ninja got down on his knees, followed by his subordinate. "Then feel free to kill us right now." Taking a moment to think, Naruto looked over his shoulder and whispered, "Sasuke." Quote. The brothers nodded to one another, one's unspoken message delivered to the other in an instant. Sasuke gave both of the former enemies a once-over with his Sharingan. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so at the very least, they hadn't set up some kind of trap. He relayed as much with a simple hand gesture. Still not convinced, the Genin trio stepped aside to discuss how to proceed while Naruto's clones remained on guard. "What the hell?" Naruto rasped, hiding his lip flaps with a hand just in case. "What in the world is going on here?" "I don't know, but if we trust them and we're wrong, then Tazuna could be in danger," Sakura said. Sasuke bit his lip. I don't know either. I don't see anything out of the ordinary, but this could still be a trick." Quote. "Okay. So how about we put it to a vote?" Naruto suggested. Sakura mulled the situation over, then crossed her arms. "I vote no." Tazuna approached and interrupted. "Hey, kids, I think we get back behind the clones," Sasuke said, holding an arm out to stop him. "We'll protect you." "Yeah," Naruto added, "nothing's gonna happen to you, believe it." Despite their reassurance, Tazuna insisted on joining the conversation. Everyone weighed in and then turned around in unison, their minds made up. Naruto stood at the front of the group, pointing a finger. "All right, you guys, we've decided that." Someone new emerged from behind Haku and Zabuza, giving everyone else pause. Kakashi-sensei stood tall in his standard uniform, restored to perfect health. "Sorry I'm late," he said with his hands in his pockets. "I heard we were going to be doing some construction work. Should I have shown up in my casual clothes?" Zabuza and Kakashi nodded at one another, their differences behind them for the time being. Naruto's jaw fell open so wide, it could have touched the ground. Sasuke and Sakura shared an equally puzzled glance. "Kakashi-sensei," Sakura said, head tilted in confusion. "You knew about this. I only found out a few minutes ago." Zabuza and Haku came by the house and explained things. "Explain things," Naruto shouted, still floored by current developments. "What things?" Zabuza held up a hand, gesturing to the crowd behind him. A handful of armed men, who Naruto recognized as some of Gato's followers, lined up behind him and bowed. Haku joined the group. Realization dawned on the construction crew and Genin's faces. We've all, Haku explained, decided to follow Zabuza. Quote, hearing it 2 more times didn't help the unbelievable statement sink in any further. Naruto wondered if he needed his ears checked, because there was no way what Kakashi-sensei and Zabuza were saying was the real deal. It wasn't logical. Yeah, Kakashi agreed, sounded crazy to me too, at first. Zabuza sighed. Shut up for a second, kid, and I'll break it down for you. Grumbling to himself, Naruto complied. Zabuza and Haku lounged in 2 of Gato's most opulent chairs while he stood, gagged and tied up, against a thick wooden support beam. The demon of the hidden mist casually flipped through a stack of Ryo, reveling in the captive businessman's muffled whimpers. Beady eyes pored over the assassins, relaxed figures, his distressed stare practically begging them to stop the several men rummaging around his hideout. While cleaning out his valuables, no one made a move to touch the area around Zabuza and Haku. The mere coldness of their presence had asserted their claim to the space. So, what do you think, Haku? Zabuza asked as he counted the Ryo in his palm. This enough to make up for our troubles? The boy looked Gato's pathetic form up and down. I don't know, Zabuza. Whatever we decide, we should get moving within the next few days. Word's going to travel fast of what happened here today. Trackers will be onto us in no time. When the crime lord's grunting became more insistent, Zabuza sighed and flicked his chin toward him. Haku. Of course. Haku flung a senbon at the gag tied around Gato's mouth, striking it in just the right spot for it to slacken and fall away. You bastards are dead, you know that. He warned. If some of these items go missing, the people I owe, people far above either of your pay grades, I'll come to collect. And you know what that means, right? When I tell them you're responsible, they'll hire ninja of your caliber or greater to chase you down. You'll have no choice but to run, and it's only a matter of time before. Zabuza swung his executioner's blade out in front of him, leveling its edge under Gato's neck from across the room. Haku and I have been running for years. Nothing about that will change. Your time in the sun is done, old man. Quote, please, Gato groveled, his attitude doing a complete 180 upon realizing threats wouldn't achieve anything. You can't do this. Do you know what they'll do to me? To both of you after me. Sharing a glance with Haku, Zabuza shrugged. Will that be before or after I put their heads on pikes next to yours? What? Gato squirmed, but his head had already left his body before he even had the opportunity to beg for his life. Silence befell the hideout as the other men in attendance looked on at the gruesome sight of a crimson faun Toyn spraying from their betrayer's corpse. Zabuza huffed, indifferent to the gory sight. Come on, Haku. The 2 strode past the crime lord's body, all eyes in the room on them as they went. Haku gave one last look at Gato, then erased his doleful glance and composed himself. Outside, they stood under the bright midday sun, evidence of their recent skirmish still lingering on the grass outside the hideout. They'd taken just enough Ryo to account for the extra trouble of the bridge assignment, leaving the rest of the spoils to the hired hands still inside the building. Zabuza holstered his blade, then set out toward the edge of the forest with Haku dutifully marching beside him. However, a voice made him stop and turn around. Excuse me, sir. Both mercenaries looked at the man prostrated before them with curious gazes. Mr. Zabuza Momochi, please hear out our request. Sure enough, several more of the men from inside the hideout emerged, joining him on the grass. We'd like to work for you. To travel alongside you. Seconds later, when Zabuza was sure he'd heard right, all he could get out was, huh. Sir, we have heard many stories about the demon of the hidden mist. We know of your reputation, and your previous attempt on the Mizukage's life. Seeing you in action today has been inspiring, to say the least. We are an impoverished people, with few prospects for the future. That's what Gato took advantage of when he came to this land. We want to work alongside you and learn from you, like this boy has. Haku gasped when the men raised their heads to observe him. Please take us with you. Glaring down at the men, Zabuza scoffed. First of all, stand up. Begging on your knees like that is pathetic. Waiting until they obeyed, he continued. Tell me, what use do I have for a bunch of talentless guys like you? Sir, we can learn. Under your guidance, we vow to become stronger and fight alongside you. Use us where needed, and we will fight in your name. The spokesman for the group gave a quick bow, sweat trickling down his face. HMPH. Still, you're not ninja. You can't use jutsu. What do you offer me? Haku leaned in, whispering, I was nothing at first too, Zabuza. Quote. The rogue ninja cut his eyes toward Haku, then pulled him aside to talk in private. You're different. You had potential these men don't. Who's to say? The boy questioned. There's strength in numbers, isn't there? At the very least, we wouldn't need to run anymore if we had a larger fighting force to deter Hunter Ninja. We could not only survive, but build up our strength and fight back. You want to return to the land of water someday soon, don't you? Quote. Something clicked for Zabuza, and he nodded. You know, you might be onto something, Haku. As much as I hate to say it, those kids in Kakashi Hatake got the better of us today. I thought they were just scared children playing at being ninja, but they outsmarted us by trying something unexpected. Just like true shinobi. Not to mention, they did us a favor by exposing Gato's lies, despite being our enemies. Maybe we need to change how we do things if we want to get ahead, too. Haku nodded. I see. So, what will your answer be? He looked over his shoulder, where the mercenaries waited with expectant gazes. Zabuza sucked in a breath, spun around, and held up a hand. The men fell silent. If you're going to travel with us, let me make one thing clear. You will do exactly as you're instructed. From today on, you'll train in the ways of ninja. I do not require things like encouragement or kind words. All I need from you is your loyalty and strength. Pledge me that, and I can promise you riches and success far beyond what Gato ever could. Quote. Stars in the listeners' eyes assured Zabuza that he had their attention. That said, he went on, if any one of you slows us down or doesn't hold up your end, I will cast you aside. From this day on, you are ninja, and ninja are nothing more than tools. Will you be my tools? A moment of hesitation was followed by a loud, yes, sir. When the chorus of voices reached his ears, Zabuza grinned beneath the fabric of his mask. He may have wished to return home and dethrone the Mizukage, but at least for now, certain things in this region needed to change as well. He would still rule over the land of water one day, but there were smaller steps he and his followers ought to take first. Haku fell into step alongside Zabuza, and the ragtag group of mercenaries set off together with their new leader. When the story concluded, Naruto hung his arms at his sides, speechless. Zabuza grimaced. What the hell kind of response is that, Blondie? Sasuke cast a shrewd glance at the reformed rogue ninja. Naruto, Sakura, if our sensei trusts him, then I say we should, too. Sakura's gaze snapped toward the Uchiha. You really think so? Yeah. Naruto grunted. Well, alright, I guess if everyone else is on board. But no funny business. He shook a fist at Zabuza, who waved him off and shepherded his group toward the unfinished section of the bridge. Tazuna flinched as the former hitman stopped in front of him, holding out a hand in reconciliation. A tense handshake cemented their new relationship, and Tazuna instructed the extra hands to assist where help was most needed. Seeing no further need for his clones, Naruto dismissed them and stood near his client, devoting all of his energy to guarding the man. The Uzumaki watched in stunned silence as Zabuza's squad, Kakashi-sensei, and the villagers all worked together to transform this bridge from a pipe dream into reality. Inari and Tsunami slid into view, distracting him. I know. Tsunami almost laughed. Like a fever dream, isn't it? Naruto stared at her, wide-eyed. You're tellin' me. Sasuke waved as Inari smiled up at him. Hey, what brought you out here with all of the adults? Quote, Inari adopted a determined stare. I was the one to march out to the bridge first. I'm here to stand up for what matters, like you said. Sasuke nodded. Good job, Inari. Naruto cut in. Yeah, that's fine and all, but if you're just here to help with the bridge, why are you all armed? Quote, the boy looked toward Zabuza and Haku and raised his crossbow as if he were going to fire. Just in case they were lying. His mother ruffled his hair, causing him to laugh. Sakura sighed. Well, if this is for real, maybe change really is coming to this land. Quote, Tsunami smiled. I hope so. She squeezed Inari's shoulders, prompting him to look up at her. Wherever he is now, I know your dad is smiling down on us. Tears welled up in his eyes and he nodded. Yeah, help from Zabuza, Haku, and dozens of others sped up work on the bridge by almost 2 weeks. Time flew by, and before anyone knew it, the job was complete and the day finally came to bid Tazuna and his family farewell. Moments before setting out on their return trip, Team 7 stood by the bridge that was already starting to see a decent amount of foot traffic and took turns saying their goodbyes. Naruto and Inari shared a tearful hug. Sasuke encouraged the latter to keep following his new path, but didn't see the need for a huge display of emotion. Although visibly disappointed at first, Inari shook it off and settled for a handshake. Don't forget not to lose that kunai, Naruto said to Tazuna, who nodded as he stared down at the flying thunder god-marked ninja tool he wore on a necklace. I'll keep it safe, Naruto, he promised. When it seemed everyone had exchanged words and the time to leave was upon them, the unexpected happened. Zabuza and Haku appeared from out of nowhere, as if they were one with the fog that hung in the air. Hey, leaf brats, Kakashi. Zabuza waved. Zabuza. Kakashi gave him a teasing smile. I had no idea you cared so much. I'm not here because of me, the former foe was quick to clarify, tensing up at Kakashi's assumption. It's Haku who wanted to see you off. The raven-haired boy bowed. When we heard you were departing today, a sidelong glare interrupted him mid-sentence. I thought we should see you off. He smiled warmly at the 3 genin and their sensei. I'm sorry things started out between us the way they did, and I'm glad we were able to become friends. Why yeah, Naruto said with an uneasy grin. Same. This whole shift in their dynamic still felt weird to him, even after so much time working alongside one another. Zabuza and I will soon be leaving this place, too. The new recruits are learning fast, and have already begun mastering basic jutsu. That's great news, Kakashi said. If this land has a stronger fighting force, you won't have to worry about someone like Gato trying to seize power again. Quote, exactly, Tazuna said. That's what convinced my daughter and I to let Inari join in on lessons. The genin and their sensei looked down at Inari in surprise. Yup, he said. I wanted to keep it a secret, hee. Oh well, I'm still going to go into business with Grandpa, but at least now I'll be able to fight if anyone tries to mess with us. Good for you, Inari, Sakura said, bending down so they were at eye level. Inari flushed red at her praise. Thanks, Sakura. Naruto, Sasuke, Haku said, stealing the boy's attention. It was a pleasure to fight against you. You are both strong. Follow your dreams and protect your precious comrades. I know you have what it takes. Naruto beamed. You bet I do. Believe it. Sasuke rolled his eyes at Naruto. Thanks, Haku. He nudged Kakashi. Anyway, shouldn't we get going? The Jonin laughed off his student's brusqueness and waved. Right. Well, best of luck, everyone. Come on, you guys. They made their way across the bridge as a unit, pleased with the outcome of the mission. By the way, Tsunami called after them as they departed, because of you inspiring my son to rally the villagers, we've decided to name this bridge after you, Sasuke. All of Sasuke's teammates' eyes honed in on him. He felt like melting into the floor under the pressure that came with being in the spotlight all of a sudden. Inari's shouted words echoed into the misty air, carried by a light breeze. It's called the Great Sasuke Bridge. Sasuke deflated. Oh, brother.